I'm just going to wait a couple of minutes here and just kind of grab a beverage, and we're going to see. There's so much news tonight. Lots of Epstein stuff going on. And lots of Epstein stuff going on, a lot of stuff going on. So, but this is somewhat of a break from a lot of that stuff. So we're just gonna kind of pause here just a little bit and see. This channel's super new, and I'm kind of getting comfortable with how things function, that sort of thing. The base of this is housed on Substack, so go over to Substack, and you'll find all of the book club information is over there, and the guides for the readers, and then guides for facilitators if you're wanting to start your own local book club, which it's pretty much the idea of this whole thing, is to do this not just online but offline as well, because part of this is building community, and it goes a bit deeper than that, but we'll get into that a little bit more. I just kind of we did a East Coast 7 o'clock, and I liked how all of that went. So I think the setup and everything is working okay. And so I'm pretty excited about that. I'm just going to kind of wait for just a couple of seconds here, and then we'll go ahead and get started. And just double checking, make sure I got everything on here that I want on here. Okay. Let's go ahead and get started with something that I would like to share with you guys. There is Mad Reads. We have quite a few books that we're going to go through and read, and a lot of these you can get for free, and there is an app. This one right here. It's called Hoopla, and when you click on that, it opens up, and this is attached to your library card. So take your library card number and download Hoopla, and then you put your library card number into Hoopla, and then it gives you access to movies, books, and audiobooks. And you can kind of see here that I downloaded 2 of these books, borrowed them like you do a library book. And so in Women, Labor, and Value, in this segment of Mad Reads, Invisible Women and Women's Work are both in there, and it's free. So with that being said, I am a strong advocate for going directly to the source. So if you can buy it off of the author's website, or if you can buy it at a local bookstore or buy them used, let's do that, and support local and support direct, and let's not feed corporates, because they're not about feeding or caring about us or our communities. Okay. Let's go ahead and get into Invisible Women. So the first book in this series, let me switch this over. And transition that over. So Invisible Women is the first book in the series that we're approaching. And this one focuses on data bias in a world designed for men, by men, and how that's kind of come about, how that affects women and children directly. And we'll kind of go into that. Now, the whole idea with this and going live is eventually we're going to have more people that are joining us, joining in the conversation, and able to share experiences, this sort of thing, and just working on getting on the same page. We're not turning this book into like a workbook or a work structure or anything like that. We're going to go through these fairly quickly. I want to get the information out there because I think it's really important to have the information out there so that we really understand better what we're seeing and how that's affecting us directly in our lives. You don't need to remember statistics in this book. You don't need to finish every chapter, and you don't need to explain this to anyone. This is more for your own reference and just seeing things and how they function in our society, and part of like how we got to where we're currently at and the direction that we're going, and the fluidity of all of this. This is not a hard structure. This is not something that always has to be a certain way. And there's some changes that are happening now that whether or not you like it or not, there's a certain group of people that are trying to force things. And that group of people might say that there's another group that's trying to force something onto them. So, with all of that being said, we all have to live together. And we live together if we understand where we came from, why certain things are happening the way that they are, and how we can make sure that all of us are included in structuring our community so that they work for all of us. So anywho, there are guides that are available to everybody. Mad Reads is not something that is being gatekept. So there will be certain aspects that just kind of highlight things or are brought in different formats where there will be a paywall there, but the information itself is not paywalled. There are certain formats that I will have all of the information is there, regardless of how it's being delivered. There's just certain deliveries where I maybe go into more depth, more discussion, whatever the case may be, where there'll be a paywall. But don't feel like you're missing anything. It's more about supporting the channel as it grows. We all got to keep our lights on, right? So let's get into a little bit more about what this is. So I've studied a little bit of this sort of thing before. I've done women's studies. I have a degree in psychology and a focus on how societies function, patterns, trends, this sort of thing have always been like a curiosity to me, something of interest to me. And coming into this book, I think that most of us kind of come into this with the vague sense that there's some things that we do at different periods of our life that just kind of seem like they're more, it takes more effort than it really should. There's advice sometimes that women receive that completely misses the point. We oftentimes feel exhausted or out of proportion to the visible workload. So we're sometimes a little bit more overwhelmed at work or more overwhelmed with our daily life expectations and activities. And sometimes we feel like maybe it's just us that we're not keeping up. And sometimes we really don't understand that there's a system or there's a structure behind that, and maybe don't have like the vocabulary to be able to express or identify what it is we're experiencing or feeling. So this book's gonna there's a lot of aha moments in this book. I've already read all the way through it, and I'll tell you, part of it was a nice refresher, and part of it was just like, of course. I mean, of course. And other things where it's like some serious red flags are flying, especially when it comes to AI and how this is going to really affect women. So we're going to get into a lot of that stuff. We're going to find out that this data is interesting and can seem a little disconnected because it just feels like data. But as she moves along in the book, you start seeing where it's not just data. This does actually affect me on a regular basis. And in some respects, it's also affecting men in how they currently live and how society currently functions. So sometimes we set up structures in the past that carry forward that no longer work the way that they were intended or thought that they would work. And so some might want to go back to the so-called good old days that never existed, or they might, or society says, no, we're actually transitioning right here because that doesn't work, this works better. So being able to identify when that is happening and the direction that that's actually heading in. So key areas to kind of watch out for. The problem isn't, so most of where we're at now, because of how our society has been structured over the past millennia or so, a lot of decision makers, boardroom people, committees, this sort of thing have been predominantly men. And they structure things through their own lens. When they do that, we have our perspective. And when we have our perspective, if we don't take into consideration or talk to other people that have maybe a different point of view, then we end up planning around what we perceive as being needed or what will function for everybody. And that's basically where we have gotten to where we're currently at today. So the problem or the system or the design isn't necessarily because of bad intent. It's who counts as the default human when data is collected or a structure is created or a system is created. And for the most part, when it comes to structuring cities, society, this sort of thing, that predominant default has been male. And when we go through and, we have been living in more of an open society where we consider all of mankind to include women and children. But when we think about what is man-made or male in the generic, we, in our heads, refer to a male figure. And so that's part of the dynamic that's going on and how that affects so many different things. So you leave out more than half of the population when you do this, and it creates problems down the road. And not just for women and children, but for men as well. So, and this is why we need to go through and kind of look at this a little bit differently. So when we fail to account for gender, we are not being neutral. We are simply defaulting to male. And then, so she's going to go into some systems and processes, structures, this sort of thing. But she's really getting into the fact that our daily routines, our decisions, the exhaustion from our day-to-day lives, a lot of this is created from structure, how things have been designed, and if they were looked at a little bit differently, they would function differently, and they would be just better for the individual people living in the community as they go about their day-to-day stuff. Overall, what ends up happening too is the system doesn't break when women don't fit in the structure or children don't fit in the structure. It continues because women continue to adapt. Doesn't mean it works better for them, but one way or another, we're left to absorb the deficits, basically. She also goes into and talks about how work is created upstream and then disappears from accounting. This is really interesting because there's a lot of work that happens that is not paid labor, or it's underpaid labor, or it's just not considered at all. And when we think about the structures of society, so we live in a capitalist society, the capitalists are really the elite. So it is a capitalist structure, yes, and we have been fed the idea that you too one day could be a billionaire. Your chances of winning the lottery are about as similar to you becoming one of those someday through your work and your efforts. Not that there hasn't been some breakthroughs, but again, like lottery tickets, it's the few and not the many. So when we think about how elites need product and how they, and this is really how they look at this. So when elite capitalists look at a population, they are looking at what it produces. This is what is counted. If they can sell it, then it's counted. If they can get something out of it, if they have to pay into it, those things are counted and they're tracked. But if they can push as much off onto the population and have them take care of themselves without them having to pay for it, then that is where the unpaid labor, the underpaid labor, and the ignored happen. This is where the invisibility happens. It's not something that they track because it is not on a spreadsheet someplace for a capitalist to keep track of. They've pushed it on to somebody else, and typically that's women. So work is created upstream and then disappears from accounting. Time spent planning, monitoring, avoiding risk, smoothing logistics, none of it registers because it prevents failure instead of producing a visible output. So it doesn't happen without it, but it is there and expected and basically extorted. So, and sometimes when we think about, like I thought I was bad at managing things. I didn't really realize I was managing around things that are dysfunctional to begin with. So that's that adaptation thing. So as you go through the book, you're going to start understanding and seeing, why some of this kind of feels like a confidence trap. Confidence coaching falls flat, boundary advice feels insufficient, resilience language feels just bluntly insulting. You can't mindset your way out of a design problem. It's the design that's the problem, not you trying to function in it. When systems rely on women's adjustment, asking women to speak up doesn't change the load, it just adds another task. And then, when you finish up the book, some of the things that are probably going to shift in you and just make you more aware as you're going through your day, what's going on, trusting your perception more, less willing to internalize friction, and more skeptical of individualizing explanations. It's not about you, it's about the system. You're not keeping up because of the system. You're feeling frustrated because of the system. You're not getting where you think you should be because of the system. It's been designed this way. And you're going to be able to better able to identify and name what you're feeling or experiencing. And so with that being said, we'll kind of get into some of this. I don't read directly from this book. I'm going to hit on some notes and encourage you as you're going through the book to just kind of write down some of the things that stand out to you. And the first couple of things that she kind of talks about is more like a background and just being kind of more cognizant of why things function around us. I used to wander through, and I've lived in small towns, medium-sized towns, big cities, all of this. And for most of my life, I wander around and it's just like, well, this is just, it's this way because it's this way. Never really thinking about, there was actually committees and people talked about this before building it and how they were going to build it and how they were structuring it, and city, and then going through the process of actually working and sitting on city boards and understanding more in depth of how things are planned, how public transportation changes to meet the needs of the current population, how streets are designed, when they're designed, what the order of changing an area looks like, why other areas don't change, food deserts, why food deserts are created, where they're created, the transportation around that. It's an entire thing, and most people go through their day-to-day life not understanding that there is an entire infrastructure and process around all of that. The majority of the people that sit on those boards, in those meetings, have predominantly been men with a male perspective, and for them, again, not through anything malicious or malice, but just leaving out the input of more than half of the population that also lives in the same freaking space. So anywho, we'll just kind of walk through some of this. And as we kind of go through and more people start coming into Mad Reads, there's going to be a bigger section where there's dialogue. And I'll go through and bring up a few things that we can all discuss, or people can talk about some of the stuff that has stood out in the book. But I'm going to go through and just kind of do my own little thing here, because people will kind of watch this after we're done going live. So the default is male, so that goes without saying for the most part, and for specific reasons why. We're not going to get into a lot of that in this book, but women's work really gets into it. Women's work goes deep on that, and then the patriarchs is interesting because, I'm not going to get into that right away. Okay, so working on this one. So the generic man, the generic masculine is not perceived inclusive of women regardless of intent. So you can say it's all inclusive, but when you think of, and this goes into language, so certain languages are very male-female oriented. Those have a tendency to be more patriarchal. Those that are not as, like Spanish is very patriarchal. They identify male, female in their nouns and this sort of thing. English is not so much like that, but then we still have things like doctor. Did you think of a male doctor or a female doctor? Depends on how you've been conditioned to look at that word. So I know there's a lot of ladies, when they're working with their kids, they make sure that they change that up so that whether or not you're raising a little boy or a little girl, that both of them understand that a doctor could be male or female. So, and it's stuff like that. But if the perspective is always pushed as male, then when you ask a child to draw a doctor, and they have been conditioned to think that that is only a male, then they are likely to draw a male doctor versus a female doctor. So that's that sort of thing. Really does have a subtle undertone in a society. And just and she goes into more detail with that, obviously, but just kind of a thought to just kind of tug on a little bit. We go into, gosh, she goes into the American Revolution, which was amazing. She kind of touched on a little thing, and I kind of wrote in a little note down here. Elite women believed the myth of their own helplessness during the American Revolution. Poor women banded together. And history misses half of the story because it's basically about like what the men did, what battles they fought. But they miss, again, the other half of the entire population. And we won't even get into like current stuff right now, although in the last 10 years, because a lot of this stuff that's been going on in the last 10 years, you remove the parties and look at the elite function in this. And you'll quickly start understanding that this really hasn't been a left-right. That was designed by the elite. So this left-right stuff is basically two heads of the same coin. We're not going to get too far into that, though. So let's talk about travel patterns here for just a little bit. Men travel differently than women do. And when the bulk of our travel infrastructure was designed and implemented, we were strongly under more of like a patriarchy influence. So like I said, in the boardrooms and the meetings, committees, this sort of thing, predominantly men. Men go from home to work traditionally, and that's their travel plan. They home to work and work to home. They also, especially early on with automotive manufacturing and this sort of thing, it was the men that did the majority of the driving because they were the ones that needed to get to work and back. As time went on, sometimes you would have 2 cars, or you're sharing a car, and maybe the wife would have to go drop the husband off so that she could run some errands for the day, whatever the case may be. But women, in their travel plans, women do 75% of unpaid care work, 75%. And so their travel patterns are a lot different. They're taking the kids to school, elder care, going to the doctor, grocery shopping, running the kids around to their after-school activities, this sort of thing. Women also have a tendency to use public transportation more because they don't have as much access to cars, especially like inner city sort of things. It's expensive to have a car in the city, so a lot more people overall use public transportation of some sort. When we also think about when we're doing this unpaid labor, this running around, we have things were set up so that we had suburbia, and then you had to travel into the city or into town to go to work. You may have an industrial area, so zoning has everything to do with how much time it takes for men versus women to get around in their city. So if you have an industrial area, if you have an area where you go shopping and it's a ways away from where you actually live, it becomes a bit problematic because now, it's a half hour here, it's a half hour there. And I've lived in situations where it's just like, it just seemed like every place I went, it was a half hour to get there. I've also lived in areas where, everything could be done within 10 or 15 minutes walking distance. So it just depends on, again, the structure of how that was designed. But when we think about most women are using public transportation, there's the wait time, there's safety issues, all of this kind of stuff comes into play. That unpaid labor that's happening there to run all of those errands is time that's taken where they're not doing something that's a counted production that goes towards their wealth building and their retirement. And so it has a long-term detriment to them when they're having to go through and do this. And society, the way that it's currently set up, does not do a good job of offsetting the deficits. Okay, and then we get into, let's talk about bathrooms. This is by design, and it's a standardized practice in architecture. And so when they do the design for the men's bathrooms and the women's bathrooms, they're given equal floor space. As a practice, it's a mirrored space. And if you kind of think about all of the bathrooms, it's equal floor space. The problem is you can get more urinals to fit in the same space than you can stalls. The other thing that isn't taken into account, because again, male perspective, not necessarily, being malicious or anything, but they didn't ask. They didn't take into consideration that, women take 2 to 3 times longer than men in the bathrooms. There's fewer stalls. There's children to deal with. There's elderly that, to deal with. There's strollers and bags. And, 20 to 25% of women that are in childbearing years have additional needs that take a little bit longer. And this backs up the lines in the ladies' bathrooms. We also deal with pregnancy, more frequent urination during that period of time, more urinary tract infections, bladder issues in the elderly. All of that has compounding issues, which is why you always see a line out the bathroom. But somehow or another, we never get the architects to go through and update how they actually put this stuff together. But again, the data shows that we're definitely getting the short end of the stick as far as efficiency in bathroom use. Some countries even make women's restrooms paid, and the men's is free. So go figure on that one. I've had a situation over in London where I didn't realize at the time that you needed change just to enter the bathrooms over there. And that was almost a disaster, And then fairly recently here in the United States, I was traveling through Salem, Massachusetts, and that little town over there has really bad public bathrooms. Like I had no access to a bathroom, and unless you actually paid for services at one of their local businesses, they weren't going to let you use the bathrooms either. So that was, I vowed I wasn't going to spend a dime in that entire town, and I did not. I was so mad, just treated horribly over there. So anyhow, it's just wild. It's like people need to use the bathroom. Yeah, goes without saying. Let's see. Oh, and one of the other things that is to take into consideration, safety around public bathrooms for women and children. And I'm going to bite my tongue on the rest of that little pause. Other things of kind of some safety and how this impacts public access and travel for men and women. 31% of men, 62% of women feel some degree of concern or fear around multi-level car parks. I, for one, won't use multi-level car parks, refuse to do it. Men, 25% of men and 60% of women have a fear of or concern around train platforms. 20% of men versus 49% of women have concerns around bus stops, and 25% of men and 60% of women have issues walking from bus stops. So, and this can keep you, they call it transit captives. So it's restricting your ability to move when you would like to move, where you would like to move, what time you would like to move because of safety issues. And it has a higher impact with women, but it also impacts men as well. Women have a tendency to experience more unwanted behaviors from men, not to the level of a crime, but it's still impactful. Escalation can be quick. Instances are generally not reported. 2/3 of women experience harassment not included in crime stats. Women frequently don't report because it doesn't hit the category of a crime. Women have been attacked on buses as the driver drives on. So there's some pretty awful things that go on in public transportation or just transportation in general. Women do report that they end up having to deal with it themselves. There's a lack of support. Workers pass it off. This creates data gaps. She really goes into this book about the data gaps, why there's data gaps, how they're created, how that has an overall impact. And some of these data gaps, they're deadly. Some of them catastrophically unsafe. Let's see. It just kind of goes into the Long Friday. And Women's Work does such a good job. Like, that one's such a good read. I am probably going to go through and listen to that one again because she does such a good job with just explaining the evolution of women's work. And but in Invisible Women, she talks about the Long Friday, and there's no such thing as a woman that does not work. There are women that are not paid, underpaid, or just ignored, invisible, but women have always worked. It's only women, she states only women who are not paid for their work, and I disagree with that. And I disagree with that because there's a lot of men that do unpaid work. In more egalitarian households, that is definitely the case. So I don't like the use of only, because I think that's too much of that's too extreme. However, 75% of unpaid work is done by women. So that's statistical. Elder care generally goes to the women with less support. And overall, all of this extra care work that women end up doing can have a detrimental effect to them. And I have seen this in my own life with my own mother. She worked outside of the home, but still expected to do everything inside of the home. And she has autoimmune issues, heart issues, basically everything that they talk about. She has developed those things from that environment. And another example too is women after a surgery, if they're married, they end up going home and caring for other people right post-surgery. Single women recover faster caring for themselves or having somebody that's caring for them. So the recovery is better and it's faster. Way back in 1930, the International Labor Organization, they did a study at that time, the ILO, and they determined that no one should exceed 48 hours of paid work for health reasons in a week. Overall studies show that when men and women exceed these work hours, women's mental and physical health take a bigger hit. Does that mean that men are the stronger, more resilient? No, because it didn't account for the additional unpaid work that she was doing at home. When men and women have similar home situations at home, these stats close the gap to be more consistent. So another thing that that she kind of goes into as well, women frequently take positions for flexibility below their skill level and their pay. This typically happens at about the time that the little ones are coming along if they've chosen to have children. It's basically a forced choice, especially with daycare as expensive as it is nowadays. This has a long-term impact. It makes women poorer. It creates a gender pay gap. Full-time pays better than part-time. Women make up 75% of part-time workers, and part-time work is paid less. So it doesn't help that most of the corporates like to do part-time. They would rather have 2 part-time workers than a full-time worker because then they also have to give them additional benefits and this sort of thing. It's less expensive for them to have 2 workers versus 1. Also, part-time work has a tendency to go in more to the gig economy, which creates some issues over there as well as far as taxation, this sort of thing. This is a compounding thing. There's a study that was done over in Germany, and I did not write down the date of it, but it was fairly recent. It stated in there, a woman who births 1 child in Germany can expect to earn $285,000 less by the time she is 45 than a woman who had no children working full-time. So it's not just $285,000, it's $285,000 plus compounding interest on what she could have been investing in instead of having a child. It's basically a retirement. And retirement does not account for any of this. It's completely left out. Maternity leave is another issue for men and women. Patriarchal societies basically don't believe in maternity leave for the father or the mother. However, U.S. is the only industrialized country that does not have paid maternity leave. 7 months to 1 year paid maternity is, studies have shown that that's actually the best for the family, and that's time for both the father and the mother. Recovery time for the mother. Women in the United States generally go back to work 2 weeks after giving birth, which is horrible. So you have an infant in daycare. Yeah, so now there's job loss during pregnancy and post-pregnancy. 1 in 4 mothers return to work 2 weeks after birth. 85% of U.S. women have no paid leave, which is why they're going back to work so quickly. A lot of these women and men would prefer flexible work from home options, reduced, and a lot of these have been reduced or removed most recently. It's a control thing for corporates, controlling population and their workers' freedoms. Homemakers are 97% women. 76% said that they would go back to work if they could work from home, and 74% said if the job had flexible hours that they would go back to work. Overtime or long hours in the office are also conflated to believe it's more effective. So the longer the more overtime you do, apparently the more efficient that you are, but that's actually not how that really functions. Although it does have an added benefit for men, rewards them more than women, because afterwards they're going out for drinks or they're going golfing during lunch break, and then they're working later to make up the difference. This sort of thing creates other opportunities that somebody that is strapped closer to the home misses out on. Promotions typically go to the career track group and not the mommy track group. We also see data differences in work expenses for reimbursement. And so while uniforms and tools it can be written off, emergency daycare can't. So if you get called into work suddenly, nope, can't write that off. You can write $30 off for takeout deduction for working late because your wife wasn't there to make dinner. You can deduct $30 for drinks, but you can't deduct $30 for daycare because you needed to stay late and had children. So, yeah. And then we're going to kind of stop here and kind of talk about a little bit about what we're going to be covering in the next live. I'm going to do lives once a week, but I'm also going to continue doing videos and discussions and this sort of thing that go through and break down different chapters or different topics, this sort of thing. So you'll kind of see those as we go through. I don't want to, I'll do very little reading out of the books themselves. Do go over to the Substack, because over there you're going to find the reading list, the list of books, and then there's also reader guides that are over there. There's facilitator guides if you want to do a book club. I am going to be doing local book clubs here, and then if you already have a book club, get together with me, because I would love to have all or part of Mad Reads introduced to your group. and revitalize things a little bit. There is more to Mad Reads than just a book club. This is about getting on the same page and doing that locally and getting to know the people around us, what skill sets they have, what resources they have, because as we kind of move through this, corporates are not taking care of us, so we need to take care of ourselves. And this is helping us better understand how to do that and why we're doing it, and give us structure as to what that looks like moving forward. And yeah, there's a lot more to it. But this is the first step. This is the first step. All right, we are going to be talking about the myth of meritocracy. We've been hearing about the meritocracy lately, right? We're going to talk about the myth of meritocracy and why that's actually a tool used by the elite and the patriarchy, and it's not good for men or women. We're going to talk about the Henry Higgins effect, work situations, and basically how certain things are structured or focused around men, but with small adjustments, women can do the work just as well. We also are going to talk about governments and how governments take a role in basically just kind of keeping division in the households. There's an intent and a purpose to why corporate elites treat populations the way that they do. And patriarchy is a tool in their toolbox that they use. And it's wielded against both men and women and has a profound impact on children. We are going to talk about the gig economy, and we'll kind of touch a little bit on, again, it's the overall impact of how some of this stuff is taxed and tracked, how women are taxed at a higher rate when married, how they want to tax women at a higher rate for being single, at a higher rate for being single and no children, being single with children. The list just goes on and on. We're going to talk about the plow hypothesis and cook stoves. That one's interesting. There's globally how cook stoves have come about and the health impacts of some of that. Then we're going to talk about one size fits men, and that is going to have how that impacts products, how that impacts how cars are designed, how safety features on cars are designed, and medical tech. The medical tech that one's disturbing. We're also going to talk about AI and how AI is going to have a huge impact on women's health and overall quality of life. And we're going to talk about a curious capitalist, like they have blinders on when it comes to women products and the possibilities there. So we're going to kind of talk about some of that. And then we'll talk about drugs, going to the doctor, this sort of thing. And then we'll talk about some of the other stuff in a different session. So it's a lot of stuff to go through. But you don't have to remember all of it. This is more about exposing, getting us to kind of think about what's going on, why we experience some of the things that we experience, how we can make things function better in our own communities. Yeah. So thank you for joining. I'll see you next Wednesday. I will have some other videos out smaller segments for us to kind of chew on. And yeah. So we'll see you next time on Mad Reads.